Part 3, Legacy. 5 years after leaving the criminal underworld, Adanna stood in the boardroom of Kwon Consulting International, 9 months pregnant, and refusing to slow down despite Joon-ho's increasingly desperate pleas. The presentation on the screen behind her showed projected quarterly earnings for their legitimate business empire, tech investments, real estate holdings, import-export operations that didn't require a single bribe or threat to function. Everything they'd dreamed of building, made real. Mrs. Kwon, one of the board members interrupted, an older Korean man who'd been skeptical of her leadership from day one. With all due respect, perhaps you should be resting. In your condition. In my condition, I'm perfectly capable of finishing a presentation, Adanna said coolly. Unless you'd like to suggest that pregnancy somehow affects my mental capacity. Uncomfortable silence. Even after 5 years, even with undeniable success, she still had to fight these battles. Still had to prove she belonged in rooms where people looked like him and not like her. Joon-ho, sitting at the far end of the table, caught her eye. A small smile played at his lips. He'd learned when to intervene and when to let her fight her own battles. This was definitely the latter. She finished the presentation without further interruption. When the board voted unanimously to approve her expansion plan, she felt the small victory like a warm glow. They were still here, still building, still proving that you could leave darkness behind and create something that mattered. The contractions started 20 minutes later. It's too early, Adanna gasped as Joon-ho rushed her to the car, his face pale with barely controlled panic. I'm not due for another 3 weeks. Bobbies don't care about schedules, he said, driving faster than he should, one hand gripping hers. Just breathe, like the classes taught us. The classes were useless and you know it, Adanna snapped, then immediately felt guilty. I'm sorry, I'm scared. I know, me too, but we're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Our daughter is going to be perfect. Their daughter. They'd found out the gender 2 months ago, after Adanna had finally agreed to stop working long enough for a proper ultrasound. A girl. Joon-ho had cried when they told him, then immediately started planning how he'd protect her from every possible danger in the world. Adanna had laughed and reminded him that their daughter would probably be as stubborn as both of them combined, and protection might be the least of their worries. But now, racing toward the hospital with contractions coming faster than they should, Adanna felt every protective instinct she'd ever developed screaming at once. This tiny person inside her, this life they'd created, she had to be okay. Had to be. The birth was complicated. The baby was breech, requiring an emergency C-section that left Adanna unconscious for the actual delivery. When she woke up in recovery, groggy and disoriented, the first thing she saw was Joon-ho sitting beside her bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in pink. She's here, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She's perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, already screaming at everyone who tries to tell her what to do. Definitely your daughter. He placed the baby in Adanna's arms, and the world contracted to just the 3 of them. This impossibly small person with her father's serious expression and a shock of dark hair. This miracle they'd created out of love that shouldn't have existed, but refused to be denied. Jaewon, Adanna said softly, using the name they'd chosen together. It meant wisdom and grace in Korean, a wish for their daughter's future. Hi, baby girl, I'm your mom. Jaewon opened her eyes, dark like her father's, and seemed to look directly at Adanna. As if to say, I know exactly who you are. I've been waiting to meet you. And in that moment, Adanna fell in love all over again. Different from how she'd fallen for Joon-ho, but just as complete, just as transformative. This was what she'd crossed oceans for. This was what every struggle, every closed door, every moment of doubt had been building toward. Family. Real, messy, complicated, beautiful family. Mi-sun arrived 2 hours later, sweeping into the hospital room like royalty making an entrance. She'd softened over the years, though she'd never admit it. Becoming a grandmother had done something to her that decades of violence and power games never had, made her human again. Let me see her, she commanded, and Joon-ho carefully transferred Jaewon to his mother's arms. Mi-sun studied her granddaughter with the same intensity she'd once used to evaluate business deals and potential threats. Then, to everyone's shock, she smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine. "She has the Kwon determination," Mi-sun pronounced. "I can see it already. This one will change the world." "Let's maybe start with changing diapers," Adanna said weakly, still exhausted from the surgery. "Small steps before world domination," Joon-ho agreed. They brought Jaewon home 3 days later, to the house in Jeju that had become their sanctuary. It was far from Seoul, far from the empire they'd built and walked away from, surrounded by ocean and sky and the kind of peace that had once seemed impossible. The first weeks were chaos. Jaewon had inherited her parents' stubbornness and seemed determined to prove that sleep schedules were merely suggestions. Adanna, recovering from surgery and dealing with the fog of new motherhood, found herself crying at random moments, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of love and responsibility and terror that she might somehow fail this tiny person who depended on her completely. "I don't know what I'm doing," she confessed to Joon-ho one night at 3 a.m., both of them exhausted, Jaewon finally asleep in her bassinet. "What if I mess her up? What if I'm not enough?" "You crossed an ocean with nothing," Joon-ho reminded her gently. "You survived in a country that didn't want you. You reformed a criminal empire. You stood up to Yakuza and corrupt businessmen and my mother. If anyone can handle one tiny baby, it's you. She's not a business problem I can solve with better organizational structure." "No, she's harder than that. She's a person who'll need love and patience and the knowledge that she matters. And Adanna," he cupped her face, "you're brilliant at making people feel like they matter. It's one of the first things I loved about you. The way you saw me, really saw me, when everyone else only saw the monster I'd become." "You were never a monster." "I was, but you loved me anyway. And that made me want to be better. That's what you'll do for Jaewon. You'll love her so completely that she'll want to be the best version of herself. Not for you, for herself." Adanna leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. "When did you get so wise?" "I married a genius. Some of it was bound to rub off eventually." The months that followed were a blur of milestones and sleepless nights and moments of pure joy that Adanna had never known existed. Jaewon's first smile, her first laugh, the way she tracked movement with her eyes, already observing, already learning. Adanna watched her daughter discover the world and felt like she was discovering it too, all over again, through fresh eyes. But peace, Adanna was learning, was never permanent. The past had a way of finding you, no matter how far you ran. The warning came from an unexpected source, Park Di-young, the former lieutenant who'd been forced out years ago for stealing. He called Joon-ho's private number, the one almost nobody had, and his voice carried the weight of genuine fear. "They're coming for you," Park said without preamble. "The old guard, the ones who never forgave you for going legitimate. They've been planning for years, waiting for the right moment, and they think they've found it." "What moment?" Joon-ho's voice was ice. "Your daughter. They know you have a weakness now, something they can use, something that would break you completely if they took it." Joon-ho's hand tightened on the phone. "Who's leading this?" "Choi Min-yi. Remember him? Your father's old enforcer. He disappeared after you took over, but he's been building his own organization. Smaller than yours was, but meaner, hungrier. And he blames you for the loss of the old ways, for turning the Kwon Empire into something soft." "Why are you telling me this?" "Silence, then, because I have grandchildren now, 3 of them. And the world Choi wants to bring back, violent, unstable, constantly at war, that's not a world I want for them. You and your wife, you proved there was another way, a better way. I didn't want to believe it, but watching my grandkids grow up safe, that matters more than my pride." He paused. "Also, you let me live when you had every right to kill me. I owe you a debt." After Park hung up, Joon-ho sat in silence for a long moment. Then he walked to the nursery where Adanna was putting Jaewon down for a nap. His face must have shown something because she immediately tensed. "What happened?" He told her everything. Watched her process the information with that quick, analytical mind he'd first fallen in love with. Saw her arrive at the same conclusion he had. "We can't run," she said quietly. If we run, they'll just follow, use Jaiwon as leverage forever. I know. And we can't negotiate. Men like that don't negotiate with people they see as traitors. I know. So we fight. One last time. We end this completely so our daughter never has to look over her shoulder. Joon-ho looked at Jaiwon, sleeping peacefully in her crib, completely unaware that her existence had just painted a target on their entire family. I promised you normal. I promised you safe. You promised me us, everything that comes with it. Adanna took his hand. We build a plan, we use everything we learned, and we make sure Choi understands that threatening our family was the last mistake he'll ever make. The plan came together over the next week. Adanna reached out to old contacts, people she'd helped during the organizational transition, people who owed favors. Joon-ho contacted the protege he'd left in charge of the legitimate business empire, who still maintained connections to the underground. Mi-sun, when they told her, surprised them by offering resources they didn't even know she had. Information networks, old favors from politicians and police, the accumulated power of a woman who'd survived in this world for 40 years. Nobody threatens my granddaughter, Mi-sun said simply. Tell me what you need. What they needed was leverage. Something that would make Choi back down without bloodshed, because starting a war with a 3-month-old baby to protect was insanity. So Adanna did what she did best. She investigated, found patterns, followed money trails. And she found something beautiful. Choi's organization was funded by a chaebol heir with political ambitions. The heir was using Choi's criminal network to eliminate business rivals and silence critics. It was brilliant and completely illegal, and if exposed, would destroy not just the heir but several prominent politicians who'd enabled him. We have everything we need, Adanna said, showing Joon-ho the evidence she'd compiled. Financial records, recorded conversations, surveillance footage. If this goes public, Choi loses his funding and his protection. He'll be vulnerable, exposed. His own organization will turn on him to save themselves. So we threaten to expose him. Better, we let him know the evidence exists, that it's distributed to multiple secure locations, that if anything at all, happens to us or our family, it automatically goes to every major news organization in Korea and internationally. We make our safety his only priority. He'll never believe we'd actually do it. Exposing him exposes the whole system, brings down people who could come after us. Then we prove we're willing. Adanna pulled up a file on her laptop. This is one piece of the evidence, a recording of the chaebol heir ordering a hit on a journalist. I'm sending it to a single news outlet, just one, enough to show we have ammunition, enough to make Choi understand we're not bluffing. Joon-ho stared at her. You've become more dangerous than I ever was. I learned from the best, but I'm dangerous in a different way. I don't need violence when I have information. The recording went public 2 days later. The news cycle exploded. The chaebol heir issued frantic denials. His political allies scrambled to distance themselves. And somewhere in Seoul, Choi Min-yi received a message on an untraceable phone. This is 1% of what we have. Touch our family and the other 99% destroys everyone you've ever worked with. Walk away. Disappear. Or burn, your choice. You have 24 hours. The response came in 23 hours. A single message. Understood, you win. Just like that, it was over. No dramatic confrontation. No final battle. Just the quiet victory of superior strategy over brute force. Adanna had weaponized information so effectively that violence became pointless. And in doing so, she'd protected her family without firing a single shot. It's really over, Joon-ho asked that night, holding Jaiwon while Adanna finally allowed herself to relax. It's over. Choi's already left Korea. Our sources say he's in Thailand. And with the scandal destroying his funding source, he'll never rebuild what he had here. He's done. We're free. We're free. They sat together in their living room, Jaiwon babbling happily between them, and felt the weight of years of violence and fear finally lifting. They'd done it, built something new, protected what mattered. proved that you could leave darkness behind and stay left. The years that followed were the peaceful ones they'd fought so hard for. Jaewon grew into a curious, fierce child who spoke Korean, English, and Igbo with equal fluency, who asked 1,000 questions about everything, who already showed signs of inheriting both her parents' intelligence. Adanna's consulting business thrived. Joon-ho discovered a passion for philanthropy, using their wealth to fund education programs and immigrant support services. They traveled to Nigeria so Jaewon could know her mother's homeland, to Japan and Thailand, and places where nobody knew their history or cared about their past. And slowly, carefully, they built a community around them. Other immigrants who'd struggled to find their place in Korea. Korean families who'd chosen to raise their children differently, more openly. People who believed that love could cross any border, that family could be chosen, that the future didn't have to look like the past. Jaewon's 5th birthday party was held in their Jeju home, the garden filled with children of a dozen different nationalities, their parents sharing food and stories in a beautiful mix of languages. Mi-sun was there, teaching Jaewon and her friends traditional Korean games with a patience nobody who'd known her in the old days would have believed possible. Adanna watched from the porch, Joon-ho's arm around her waist, and felt something she'd spent most of her life chasing. Contentment. "What are you thinking?" Joon-ho asked. "That I started this journey thinking home was a place I had to find. Lagos, then Korea, always somewhere else, somewhere better." She leaned into him. "But home isn't a place, it's this. It's you and Jaewon and the life we built. It's the garden where Nigerian flowers grow next to Korean ones. It's Sunday mornings making pancakes while our daughter tells us elaborate stories about her imaginary friends. It's boring and beautiful and exactly what I needed. No regrets. So many regrets, but none about the important parts. None about you. None about choosing to stay when everyone told me to go. None about fighting for this life even when it seemed impossible." Jaewon ran up to them, covered in cake frosting and joy. "Mama, Appa, come see what Grandma taught us." They let themselves be pulled into the party, into the noise and chaos and perfect imperfection of family. And for the first time in her life, Adanna Kwon, immigrant, strategist, wife, mother, felt completely at home. But life, as always, had one more lesson to teach. Jaewon was 7 when she came home from school crying. Not the normal tears of childhood frustrations, but deep, wrenching sobs that broke Adanna's heart. She held her daughter, waiting for the storm to pass, finally coaxing out the story. "They said I'm not really Korean," Jaewon hiccuped. "That I'm half African so I don't belong. That my mom is a foreigner and that makes me foreign too. They said," more tears. "They said mean things about you, Mama, about your skin, about why Appa married you." Adanna felt old rage rising, the same rage she'd carried since her first days in Korea. But she pushed it down, forced herself to be calm. This wasn't about her pain. This was about her daughters. "Come here, baby," she said softly, pulling Jaewon onto her lap even though she was getting big for it. "Let me tell you a story about a woman who came to Korea with nothing, who was rejected and dismissed and told she didn't belong, who fought anyway, who found love anyway, who built a life anyway. You want to hear it?" Jaewon nodded, still crying but listening. So Adanna told her. Not all of it. Jaewon was too young for the violence, the danger, the dark parts, but the important parts. The struggle, the persistence, the refusal to be made small by people who couldn't see her value. "And you know what I learned?" Adanna said when the story was done. "Being different isn't a weakness. It's a superpower, because you see things other people miss. You understand worlds they'll never access. You're Korean and Nigerian and American and completely yourself. You're not half anything, you're whole everything. And anyone who can't see that is missing out on knowing the most amazing person I've ever met." "But it hurts," Jaewon whispered, "when they say those things." "I know, baby, it does hurt. It probably always will a little bit. But here's the secret." Adanna lifted her daughter's chin. "You don't let their ignorance define you. You define yourself. You decide who you are and what you're worth. And then you live so authentically, so powerfully, that eventually they have no choice but to see you. Like you did. Like I tried to do. Some days I succeeded. Some days I failed. but I never stopped trying, and neither will you. Joon-ho had been standing in the doorway, listening. Now he came and sat beside them. You know what makes you special, Jaewon? Really special. What? You come from two people who refused to be broken, who fought for the right to love each other, to build a family, to exist in a world that told them it was impossible. That strength is in your blood, your mother's courage, your grandmother's determination, your heritage from two countries that both have histories of surviving the impossible. You're not less than anyone. You're more, and one day you'll prove it. Jaewon considered this seriously. Then, with the resilience of children, she wiped her eyes and asked, "Can I have ice cream?" They laughed and said yes, because sometimes the answer to deep pain was simple comfort. But Adanna knew that conversation was only the first of many they'd have. That raising a mixed-race child in Korea meant constantly navigating prejudice, constantly rebuilding her daughter's confidence, constantly fighting battles she'd hoped were already won. But she'd do it. They'd do it together, because that's what family meant. 10 years later, Jaewon stood in front of Seoul National University, acceptance letter in hand, the first person in their family to attend. She'd become everything Adanna had hoped and more: brilliant, compassionate, fierce in her defense of justice. She'd started a nonprofit helping immigrant families navigate Korean systems. She spoke 5 languages. She'd written essays about mixed-race identity that went viral and started national conversations. And she'd done it all while fully, completely being herself. "I'm scared," Jaewon admitted the night before she left for university. "What if I'm not ready?" Adanna smiled, remembering standing in an airport in Lagos, terrified and hopeful, not knowing if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. "You're ready. You've been preparing for this your whole life, even when you didn't know it. And baby," she took her daughter's hands, "you're going to fail sometimes, make mistakes, face rejection, feel like giving up. But you're also going to succeed in ways you can't imagine yet. Just like I did, just like your father did. We're survivors. It's the family business." "I thought the family business was boring corporate consulting," Jaewon teased. "That's the official version. The real family business is taking impossible situations and making them possible through sheer stubborn determination." "Then I'm definitely qualified." The day they dropped Jaewon at university, Adanna cried. Not from sadness, but from pride. This brilliant, confident young woman was her legacy. Her daughter was facing a Korea that was slowly, painfully changing, more diverse, more open, more willing to acknowledge that being Korean could look different than it had before. And Jaewon would help push that change further. That night, alone in their Jeju home for the first time in 17 years, Adanna and Joon-ho sat on their porch watching the stars. "We did it," Joon-ho said quietly. "Did what?" "Broke the cycle. My father raised me in violence, taught me power was everything, that weakness was death, that love was a luxury we couldn't afford. I thought I'd pass that on, thought I'd poison our daughter the way I'd been poisoned. But you didn't." "No, because you showed me another way. You loved me when I was unlovable, saw potential in me when everyone else saw a monster, believed we could build something better. And we did. We built Jaewon, this fierce, kind, brilliant person who's going to change the world." "She got that from both of us," Adanna said. "Your determination, my stubbornness, your strategic mind, my refusal to accept limitations. The best parts of us, and none of the worst." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the ocean catch moonlight. Two people who shouldn't have met, who definitely shouldn't have fallen in love, who'd built an impossible life through sheer force of will. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone to that club?" Adanna asked. "If I hadn't knocked on that door? All the time, I'd probably be dead, or worse, still alive but empty. Running an empire I hated for people I didn't care about. You saved me, Adanna, in every way a person can be saved. You saved me too. Gave me a reason to stay when every rational part of me said run. Showed me that belonging isn't about where you're from. It's about who sees you and chooses you anyway. So we saved each other. The best kind of love story. Joon-ho pulled her clothes, and they stayed like that until the stars faded and dawn painted the sky in shades of hope. Two survivors, two fighters, two people who'd proven that love could cross oceans, survive violence, build empires, raise children, and create legacy. The immigrant who stole the heart of a Korean mafia king had done more than survive in a foreign land. She'd thrived, built a family, changed an entire organization, raised a daughter who would change the world, and she'd done it all while staying completely, authentically herself. That was the real victory, not the wealth or the status or the escape from danger, but the simple, profound triumph of being Adanna Kwon, immigrant, wife, mother, entrepreneur, survivor, and knowing, finally and completely, that she was exactly where she belonged. And that's where our story ends, but where their legacy continues. Thank you for taking this journey with Adanna and Joon-ho. If their story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in the power of love that refuses to quit, please subscribe. Please like this video. Please comment and tell me what part of their journey resonated most with you. But more than that, take their lesson into your own life. You are not defined by where you start, what people say about you, or the obstacles in your path. You are defined by your courage to keep going, your refusal to be made small, and your willingness to build the life you deserve. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in stories that matter. Until next time.